Hello, in this video we're taking a look at the 7 deadly sins. These are wrath or anger. Here Donald Duck is feeling angry at being splashed by a car. Here we have pride, also known as vanity or vainglory. Here Minnie Mouse is looking at herself in a mirror with pride. We have avarice, also known as greed. Here Uncle Scrooge is being upset with birds who are stealing money from his safe to make their nest. Envy. Here Hetty Wolf is feeling envious of Patsy Walker because apparently Patsy has a boyfriend and Hetty doesn't. Gluttony. Here we have a picture of little Lotta enjoying a huge corn cob in a movie theater, much to the dismay of the people sitting beside her. Lust. Here we have Bob Hope feeling very happy about 2 women fighting over him because he says no matter which side wins, I can't lose. Because what he really wants is to have sex with either one of those women. And then we have sloth, also known as laziness. Here we have a picture of Homer Simpson sleeping on the job. And here's some things to note about the 7 deadly sins before we move on to further descriptions of them. First, the 7 deadly sins are understood to be the roots of other sin. So they are psychological qualities, not specific acts such as the 10 Commandments deal with. So we might have various other sins such as robbing or lying, but the 7 deadly sins are not concerned so much with those, but with the psychological qualities that could lead to such acts. Also, they are said to be deadly because their sinfulness is so deep-rooted, it can endanger a person's salvation. And regardless of whether Christian salvation is an issue, they can hinder spiritual growth or moral development. So, the idea here is, even if there is no hell, even if there is no God, even if salvation in the Christian sense is nothing that we ultimately need to be concerning ourselves with, we can still be concerned with spiritual growth or with moral development, and understand that the 7 deadly sins are hindrances to these, and to grow spiritually or to develop ourselves morally, it would help us to understand what the 7 deadly sins are and how to avoid them. Let's move on now to descriptions of the sins. Here we have wrath, and wrath is excessive anger. The Buddhists describe it as inability to bear something, someone, or intention to do harm, which is similar to the Catholic idea that wrath is the desire for vengeance. And some synonyms or near synonyms of wrath, or some forms of wrath, are irritation, hostility, combativeness, vengeance. And I put these in sort of an escalating order, where irritation is just mild and hostility goes beyond irritation, combativeness beyond that, and vengeance being the ultimate expression of wrath. And here I've illustrated wrath with a picture of Medea. If you don't know the story of Medea, it's from Greek mythology, and Medea is the wife of Jason. Jason is famous for finding the golden fleece and for traveling with the Argonauts. And at one point, Jason gets the opportunity to marry a princess, and he considers this a good political move because it will increase his power. So he decides to divorce Medea and marry this princess. Well, Medea doesn't like that at all, and she grows very, very irate with Jason and murders her own children in front of him in order to punish him for leaving her for another woman. And so some of the problems with wrath are it leads people to hurt or attack others physically or verbally. It leads people to delight in inflicting cruelty. It stirs up wrath in others, making enemies of friends. It poisons relationships. It obstructs forgiveness. When you feel wrathful towards someone, it's very hard to forgive that person. Psychologically, it undermines contentment. When you feel wrath towards someone, when you feel great hostility towards someone, it's hard to feel content. And one big problem with wrath is it can lead to the crime of murder. And now we move on to pride. Aquinas defines pride as inordinate desire to excel. We may also describe it as inordinate estimation of one's worth, or as an unwarranted sense of superiority. And some synonyms or near synonyms of pride are vanity, hubris, and arrogance. If you don't know the word hubris, this comes from the Greeks, and it's illustrated in Greek mythology, for example, by Bellerophon, who tries to ride Pegasus up to Mount Olympus, but he gets tossed off by the gods because they don't like his hubris. The idea that he thinks he's their equal or one as good as them. And I've illustrated pride with a character who has very incredibly high hubris. This is the Monkey King. He's a character from Chinese folklore. And he's a monkey, and he's a king of monkeys. And he's a very powerful character, and he prefers to call himself Great Sage, Equal of Heaven. That's the title he prefers. And at one point he decides to overthrow the Jade Emperor, who is basically God, the ruler of heaven, and take his place. And for that crime, he gets trapped under a rock for 500 years. Okay, so here's some of the problems with pride. Pride leads people to not recognize their own faults. And because of that, it hinders self-development. When you cannot recognize your own faults, you cannot work at correcting them. Pride allows evil to be done under the delusion of doing good. You may be so prideful that you do bad things to people believing that you're actually doing them some good, or that you're doing good in the world. Pride can lead people to be condescending to others. It impairs relationships with people regarded as inferior. It reduces empathy. And it can lead to bigotry, where you think your group is better than other groups, and you treat people in a poor manner or discriminatorily because of your bigotry. And now we move on to envy. Aquinas defines envy as sadness about another's good as being a hindrance to one's own excellence. Ayn Rand, a noted atheist, writes an article called Age of Envy, in which she's complaining about what she calls envy, and she describes it as hatred of the good for being the good. Envy can also be described as pain felt at the success of others. And let's look at some definitions from the Devil's Dictionary. This is a satirical dictionary. The definitions in this dictionary are not literally accurate. However, the definitions of the words I've listed here highlight aspects of envy, which is why I've included them here. Pain is defined here as an uncomfortable frame of mind that may have a physical basis in something that is being done to the body, or may be purely mental, caused by the good fortune of another. Of course, that's the pain of envy there. It describes happiness as an agreeable sensation arising from contemplating the misery of another. And this, of course, is not our usual idea of happiness, but it's a way in which an envious person may sometimes feel happy. This kind of happiness is also known as Schadenfreude. I think Nietzsche coined the term. It's a German word. It means feeling pleasure at others being unhappy. And then we have a definition of hatred, a sentiment appropriate to the occasion of another's superiority. And that may seem like a ridiculous definition of hatred, but it does fall in line with the thing that Ayn Rand was complaining about, where envy is hatred of the good for being the good. And here I've illustrated envy with a picture of Iago and Othello and Desdemona from Shakespeare's play Othello. And if you don't know the story behind that play, it's about Iago and Othello, and Iago is incredibly envious of Othello. Othello has a beautiful wife. He's well regarded in the army that they both serve in. I think he has a higher rank than Iago. And so Iago has many reasons to be envious of Othello. And Iago just can't stand this. He can't stand how much better Othello is than he is in just about everything. And he wants, instead of working to make himself more like Othello, he decides he's going to come up with a scheme to bring down Othello. And that scheme involves convincing Othello that his wife Desdemona is cheating on him, which will lead Othello to murder Desdemona. Okay, so some of the problems with envy are: it's more painful to feel than the other 7 deadly sins. It hurts relationships with people who are better off or superior. It leads people to bring others down rather than to improve themselves, Iago being a good example of that. It diminishes the ability to feel happy for others. It impairs the ability to love others. And it can lead to betrayal, as Iago, for example, betrays Othello. Now we move on to avarice. Aquinas has defined avarice as immoderate desire for riches. And the avaricious person pursues money, possessions, and such as though they have intrinsic value. We know that money, if we think about it, we know that money only has instrumental value. The value of money is only good because of what we can do with it. And it's not worthwhile in and of itself. But avaricious people sometimes treat money and other possessions that have only instrumental value as though they have intrinsic value. And some synonyms or near synonyms of avarice include covetousness, stinginess, selfishness, and greed. Here I've illustrated avarice with a picture of Uncle Scrooge again, but Uncle Scrooge in the role of Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol. And he's looking intently at his account books. Notice how his eyes are narrowed down, focusing on his books. He has some coins here, but he has very bare furnishings. You can see he's just thinking about money. He's not thinking about anything else in his life that could be worth of value to him. And so some of the problems with avarice are it leads people to seek after more than they need, even at the cost of what others need. You may remember from A Christmas Carol, Scrooge is not thinking about what his employee needs. Avarice leads people to disregard the needs of others. It diminishes appreciation of finer things. Scrooge is a good example of this. He's a miser. He lives as though he were in poverty, even though he's a wealthy man. It diminishes the ability to appreciate life. There's such an intent focus on money and accumulating money and on wealth and so on that the avaricious person fails to appreciate what that money can be used for, the other things that make life worth living. And avarice can lead to such crimes as exploitation of people and to robbery. Now we move on to gluttony. The Catholic Encyclopedia describes this as excessive indulgence in food and drink. It can be described as to eat, drink, or smoke for mere pleasure rather than for nourishment. And note that I've added smoking in here. With smoking, if a person is smoking just because he enjoys it, and with the knowledge that it's bad for him, but he doesn't care so much about that, but he cares more for the pleasure, that's an example of gluttony, even though it's not really food or drink. Also, gluttony can be described as to live just in order to eat and drink, instead of vice versa. Normally, eating and drinking are things we do to stay alive, but the gluttonous person turns that around and lives in order to eat or drink, where eating and drinking are what gives them his sense of happiness and satisfaction with life. Gluttony is a form of self-indulgence, of intemperance. And here I've illustrated gluttony with a picture of Homer Simpson eating a steak off of a plate on the ground with these other animals looking on at him, wondering, what are you doing? And this is showing how gluttony can make a person animalistic. Okay, some dangers of gluttony are: 1, there's the danger of obesity or poor health through overeating or over drinking or over smoking. There's a focus on quantity over quality, diminishing the ability to savor and appreciate life. As shown here, it can make a person animalistic, leading to neglect of higher faculties. And if you watch The Simpsons, you know that Homer Simpson is not a person who really attends to his higher faculties. There's an emphasis on hedonism, which can lead to neglect of meaningful activity. And gluttony can lead to self-degradation, as shown here, for example. And we move on to lust. The Catholic Encyclopedia describes lust as the inordinate craving for or indulgence of the carnal pleasure which is experienced in the human organs of generation. More briefly, it can be described as excessive interest in sexual activity. There's a carnal orientation in lust. It's an inordinate interest in pleasures of the flesh as opposed to the mind or spirit. Here I've illustrated lust with a picture from the Tex Avery cartoon Red Hot Riding Hood. The character, the big bad wolf, is looking on with lust at Red Hot Riding Hood. His eyes are popping out, his tongue is hanging out, he's jumping back a bit on his heels, his shoulders are raised. And here are some of the problems with lust. It treats sex merely as an animalistic activity, not as something sacred or spiritual. And between two people who love each other, sex can be something very spiritual or sacred. There's the whole idea of Tantra Yoga, for example, from Hinduism, which treats sex in a sacred way. Also, lust can bestialize the person who lusts and objectify the person lusted. This picture is showing the idea of how a lustful person can be bestialized by lust. We commonly call very lustful men wolves, as shown, which is why he's a wolf here. And that reflects the idea of how lust can bestialize people. Also, lust can lead to adultery, to incest, or various perversions. It can break hearts or destroy relationships. It can lead people to seek to dominate and control others, as is common in Islam, which is a very lust-oriented religion. And it can lead to the crime of rape. Now we move on to sloth. Aquinas defines sloth as sadness about one's spiritual good on account of the attendant bodily labor. Sloth may be described as an aversion to effort. It's also called laziness, and negligence is a big component of sloth. And here I've used the same picture as before to illustrate sloth. Here Homer Simpson is reading Habits of Highly Effective People, but because he's asleep, he's not really learning anything from the book. You see his drink is spilling onto his control panel. He's asleep on the job, and his job is a safety inspector at a nuclear power plant. If there's a problem, the whole plant could explode and causing everyone in Springfield to die. And he could cause that by his slothfulness. So he's endangering lives here by what he's doing. So let's look at some problems with sloth. It hinders and prevents accomplishment. It stalls self-improvement. You might know what your faults are if you're slothful and work on improving them, but through sloth, you might not work so much at it. You might know what you need to do, but not actually do it. It can lead to neglectful endangerment, as shown here. It can sap zest for life, leading to anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure in anything. It can lead to neglect of self, leading to accelerated decline. Very slothful people can grow older at an accelerated pace and look old before their time. Sloth can lead to people to neglect to stand up for what is right, allowing evil to have its way. So even if the slothful people aren't around doing bad things to other people, they're allowing others to do bad things because they're not standing up to stop those people. And it can lead to apathy, which is a very bad condition for people to be in. Where apathy is, yeah, with apathy, you're not really concerned with anything at all. You don't care about anything, and you let yourself go to pot, you let other things go to pot, and it's just very bad all around. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here. In the next video, I will be focusing more on an analysis of the 7 deadly sins. This was just an introduction to them, so look out for the next video if the subject interests you. And be sure to like it or favorite it if you think other people should be watching this video. Thank you for watching.